You're listening to the Baumbastic Podcast with Andrew Ellis on Inside Arkansas.
What's going on, everybody, and welcome back to the Baumbastic Podcast, presented by Inside Arkansas and hosted by Andrew Ellis, the best damn baseball show you've ever seen, heard, thought of, or even knew was possible. Appreciate you guys for being here with me today on this Wednesday, February 19th. It's still cold AF here in Fayetteville, here in Northwest Arkansas. So again, I hope everyone is staying safe. Hope you've loaded up on everything you need. You got your toilet paper, you got your milk, you got your bread. You got whatever you need. And hopefully the Razorbacks will not have too much trouble as they try and leave Northwest Arkansas here later this week. I guess tomorrow is when they will be traveling to Arlington for a 3-game series. They will play TCU on Friday. No, Kansas State on Friday night, TCU on Saturday night, and then Michigan on Sunday. I will be down there with my lovely girlfriend, Hillary. We will be, we together will be bringing you guys the scoops, bringing you guys the coverage and all the latest action dealing with the Diamond Hogs, which is what we do on this show. On yesterday's show, we basically reassessed where we're at with the lineup, kind of went position by position, talked about what the guys had done over the weekend, and sort of, again, kind of tried to forecast where we see this thing heading. Ruffled a lot of feathers. People were not happy with yesterday's episode. Not a fan favorite episode. But again, it's early. There's a lot of overreactions. There's a lot of frustration with certain guys. A lot of this guy needs to go here. And there's a lot of arguments to be had. There's a lot that's up in the air with the Razorback lineup, which we kind of expected. It's early in the year. We're going to see probably a different lineup every day. We saw 4 completely different lineups in week 1. Who knows what they'll do this weekend? Maybe it'll be a little bit more by the book. But I imagine that the 3 games this weekend will feature 3 different lineups, maybe a guy or 2 here to there. So hopefully we're moving forward to some clarity. On today's show, we are going to talk about the pitching staff more and kind of focus on that. And frankly, there's a lot less uncertainty with the pitching staff, which is nice. We can kind of argue for guys here and there and who goes where and who goes and does what. But for the most part, we kind of know what's going to be happening here. And so we're going to reassess kind of where the circle of trust is at for those of you that tuned into our episode a few weeks ago when we introduced the circle of trust. From my point of view, it's kind of just who the coaching staff feels good about. If anyone from the circle of trust is on the mound, it's expected, you feel good, and it's an exclusive group. We're a little lenient early in the year with who all's in the circle of trust. It might get a little bit smaller as the season goes on. You get into SEC play. You see these bullpen leashes start to really shorten up once you really start to establish who your top guys are. And I would also remind people that, everyone always says, oh, you need 10, 12, 14 arms to get through the year, which, is true on a game-to-game basis. You need guys to throw midweeks. You need whatever. But once you get in the SEC, once you get into 3-game series and the stakes become a little bit higher, maybe your starters have a little bit longer leash, you really need about 8 guys. Like for the most part, there's really going to be about 8 guys that pitch for you each given weekend. And then maybe a couple here and there on top of that. But for the most part, you look at some of the best Arkansas teams that we've seen, a lot of them got through the bulk of the season and even into the postseason with 6, 7, 8 guys. Like that 2018 Arkansas team, you had your 3 starters. You had Matt Cronin as a closer. You had Jake Reinl and Barrett Losky as kind of the setup mid-relief guys in that bullpen as well. Maybe a mix in with some Cody Scroggins or someone like that. But there really weren't a ton of guys that they really depended on a week-to-week basis in high-leverage situations. So, again, we're going to jump into all of that and kind of dive and reassess where we're at with the pitching staff. There's not a ton of massive updates necessarily, but we're going to talk about all of that. But before we do that, Dave Van Horn met with the media today, and there weren't a ton of groundbreaking news developments that came out of this Dave Van Horn press conference. Of course, he's kind of just previewing the weekend of Arlington, and there's still a few days before they play, so I'm sure we'll get a little bit more. I think he'll meet with the media again tomorrow. I will not be there Thursday, but I think he'll do some type of scrum interview Thursday while they practice. So maybe he'll announce something there. He did not announce a starting rotation, which I thought he might, but again, it is Wednesday. They don't play till Friday. And when we talked to him, he said he basically wanted to talk to the guys that were involved in the decision-making process. Of course, we expect that decision to be made between Gage Wood and Landon Beidelshees of who's going to get that Game 3 nod. But he also, gave some inklings as to which way they might go there, and we will talk about all that. But I felt like the most noteworthy development from the press conference when he was asked about Cam Kojal and kind of what position he might be able to play. So I wanted to play this clip real quick before we get into the pitching stuff. Here's what Dave Van Horn said when asked what all positions Cam Kojal could wind up playing for the Arkansas Razorbacks, if not second base.
Well, he can play a lot of positions. Right now, obviously our third baseman's doing really well. But if there was an injury or needed a day off, he could go to third. We could put him at first, and we've worked him out there a little bit. So you started talking outfield, probably do that. And yeah, I've talked to Cam a couple of times. I think the latest was last week about catching, that something he might want to try because he's a left-handed hitter and he's very strong and physical. You saw what happened when the big boy ran into him the other day. It didn't even faze him. And, you never know. We've had some infielders here that have become catchers and did a pretty good job. And obviously Tom Pagnozzi's the first one you mentioned. And then Jimmy Kramer's a long time ago in like 1985 was a third baseman out of Little Rock and hit left-handed, and there was things going on there, put him behind the plate. He made it to the big leagues as a catcher. And so, you never know, just looking at body styles and attitude and their makeup and toughness, and you can see a little bit of traits of a catcher and, whatever. But he's a good ball player and he cares about the team, wants the team to win. Even when he's not playing, he's standing right up there getting after it and cheering his teammates on, and I really appreciate that.
So there you have it. That's very interesting there. I mean, Cam Kojal, the catcher, is just not something I expected to be a thing. And he did reference that. I think it was in a press conference maybe 2 weeks ago. And credit to Matt Jones of Whole Hog Sports, not to be confused with the Matt Jones, the former quarterback turned wide receiver, or to be confused with the Kentucky Sports Radio Matt Jones, or to be confused with the Florida running back Matt Jones, or to be confused with the 3-and-D wing that played at Duke. That is also the older brother of Mason Jones. Don't confuse this Matt Jones with any of those Matt Joneses. But seriously, credit to him because he asked the question and was like, you mentioned Kojal as a catcher. I don't know if you were joking, but what all positions could you see Kojal playing? And I can't remember if he said it in that clip or the other one, because he was asked about Kojal a couple times. First base is, of course, an option. That's something that he even had said they've been working him out there. So that's kind of a recent development that is not like a groundbreaking thing. That's something we've talked about. Hell, I talked about it on the show yesterday, but we haven't seen him play first base in scrimmages. So I was kind of wondering at what point they would start to consider that. Outfield is, of course, a possibility. I know Nolan Souza, who, of course, is kind of in this second base battle as well. They worked him out in the outfield last year. Maybe they didn't like what they saw. I don't know. They haven't gone that route in games or in scrimmages yet. He also mentioned, of course, Brent Iredale's the starting third baseman. No debate there, but, if Brent needs a day off, maybe you rest Brent Iredale, you get Kojal in there. That's a way to do that. So, again, when this Nolan Souza, Cam Kojal debate continues to happen, my stance the whole way along has been it doesn't have to be an either-or thing. There are multiple different routes to playing both those guys. I don't want anybody to be confused and think Cam Kojal is going to start the Saturday game at catcher this week, and I don't expect that to be the case. But I thought that was very interesting that he even mentioned it and kind of thought that he had some of the traits that you might look for in a catcher and thought that might be something he could make a lot of money doing. Maybe that's what he ends up doing professionally. That was very interesting to me. Of course, Arkansas has a catcher in Ryder Helfrich, who is the same class as Kojal as a sophomore. So I don't know how that would work necessarily, but just definitely something that intrigued me. And of course, we also like what we've been seeing from Zane Becker, the freshman catcher. But I don't think that, I did not expect to hear that. And I thought that was interesting. And so again, I think it kind of speaks to, they feel like Kojal is going to be in that top 9-10 hitters, and you kind of got to find a way to get him in the lineup. And he seems like the kind of guy, the kind of skill set, the kind of personality that you can probably make work anywhere, which I think is also kind of how they felt about Rocco Pepe, which led to him at first base. So again, we'll continue to monitor that situation and see how that all plays out and see where the lineup ends up shaking out. But let's talk pitching. So again, I've introduced the circle of trust, which I feel is just kind of who the coaching staff has their faith in. It's kind of the hierarchy. And again, this isn't even really like my opinion. A lot of times when I say stuff on the podcast, it's construed as like, this is my opinion. This is what I think. This is more just kind of my guess as to how the coaching staff is going to use a lot of these guys. So this is what the circle of trust looked like the last time that we did this conversation, which was about 2 weeks ago, give or take. Obviously, I have your three starters there. I kind of assumed and predicted it would be Landon Beidelshees with Gage Wood. There's a setup guy. Christian Pouch is a closer. Carson Wiggins in the setup. Coyle and Bybee there in mid-relief. Will McIntyre, Dylan Carter. And then you had some midweek starting options there. I want to update that just slightly. It's not going to look crazy different, but we now have a cool graphic for it. So this is now the updated Arkansas Razorback Circle of Trust here. Again, not vastly different from what we saw. You see the same kind of options there in the starting rotation, which, by the way, let's talk about the starting rotation for just a second. I'm going to look you guys in the eyes when I say this. Dave was asked about it, and of course he said, okay, we want to talk to these guys. It's 2:00 in the afternoon as I'm recording this. By the time I publish this episode, they may or may not have announced a starter. He said that was a possibility, that he would talk to the guys and then maybe they would put something out. And of course, before they play baseball in Arlington, we will have a firm understanding of who is getting that Game 3 nod. And Dave was very coy about how he played it. But I want to read. Actually, let me pull it up real quick. He seemed to give an indicator that it might be Gage Wood, or at least that's kind of how I construed it. If you give me a second, I'm filibustering here while I try and pull up this quote. Crap. But it was basically along the lines of, let's see if I can get it. Okay, here was the exact quote. He says, he's talking about all the starting pitchers. They all did a great job of giving us 5 innings. Makes it obviously difficult to figure out who not to start. But when you start really looking at it, you probably just go with the guys that have had the most rest. Again, that's not his announcement saying it's for sure going to be Gage Wood starting Game 3. But if you just think about it, Landon Beidelshees threw on Monday. He threw, I think, 75, 78 pitches, somewhere along in that like sub 80 range. Gage Wood threw on Saturday. Zach Rudd and Gabe Gackel both threw on Friday. So all three of those guys check that box of have had the most rest. And so I felt like maybe that was a little bit of an indicator that it might be Gage Wood that gets that Game 3 start, which again, we've known kind of all offseason it was between Wood or Beidelshees for that Game 3 spot. And again, if you've been paying attention and listening, I really hope everyone has. I don't really view it as a like, hey, this guy is better than this guy, so may make this guy the starter and this guy the reliever. I honestly feel like both guys are big-time arms. They're both in that same kind of range as prospects, top 200, top 250, some of the best in their class. One's right-handed, one's left-handed. They have a little bit different arsenal. But ultimately, I feel like both guys have the stuff in the arsenal and the mindset to be a successful starting pitcher. We've already seen Landon Beidelshees start. They both started this past week and threw well, but Beidelshees was a Friday night starter at Ohio State last year, did a pretty good job. And so we've seen him in that role. And I think Gage Wood is a guy that kind of has been being built up as a starter over the last 3 years. We've kind of seen his evolution. I think he's pitching better than ever. I think he can certainly handle that starting spot. But I also think both guys are a good fit in a closing situation. Both guys also have experience closing at the Division I level. Gage, we've obviously seen countless times in the 9th inning here at Arkansas. And so we'll see what direction they go. But it seems like, at least for this week, they're going to give Gage a shot to start. And the most intriguing part of this to me is that you have Landon Beidelshees in the bullpen, a role that, no matter who, whether it was Wood or Beidelshees, whoever was going to end up in the bullpen was going to be very overqualified for that role. But I think with a guy like Beidelshees, again, if you remember back in the fall, I spoke about his outing he had in the Fall Classic where he comes in and throws 14, 15 pitches. And I think all but one of them were fastballs, and they were all 95, 96, 97. Like when he knows he only has to throw 1 or 2 innings, you see a little bit different version of Landon Beidelshees. He sees him let loose a little bit, which I think is very interesting. And it just kind of excites me just thinking about that, having a guy who, we've seen him start. He's good as a starter. You bring him in the 8th inning of a 2-run game, and it's like that game's over. And now you're going to get a guy, like I said, very overqualified for his role. And I think, I want to give credit to Gage Wood because I think there's no doubt about it. This wouldn't be a conversation if Gage Wood didn't fully, unequivocally earn to be in this conversation. And he gave himself a very good opportunity to just be in this mix alone. I mean, it's just a credit and a testament to how he's thrown this offseason. I wonder how much, and I think that Dave said it best there. You saw the quote, or you heard the quote that I just read to you. It really just came down to Beidelshees has less rest. But again, they chose to throw Beidelshees on Monday. So it's just kind of interesting the way it's played out. But I also think Gage Wood's ability to have throw the velocity. He was throwing 96, 97, which is up from what we've seen from him, but he was able to hold it throughout 3, 4, 5 innings of work. And with Beidelshees, the only inning he really ran into any trouble at all was his 5th inning of work. Before that, it had been 2 bunt singles, one of which was very, very close, bang, bang play. The 5th inning was kind of the only inning that he ran into any trouble where he had to really labor a little bit. I wonder if maybe that factored into the decision-making of like, hey, if we shorten this guy's role, maybe make him throw 2, 3, 4 innings, maybe that's the best way to get most effectiveness out of him. So again, we'll pull back up the circle of trust here. So you have, I put, again, there's a little bit of a cop-out here where I have Wood and Beidelshees kind of split there in the starter because we still don't know. At least not as of this moment as I'm recording it. Again, when I record this, they may have already announced the starter. And if it ends up being Landon Beidelshees, just go ahead and erase everything that I just threw out there about Gage Wood and how awesome he is and how he's going to thrive in that starting role. I kid, but kind of a little bit of a cop-out having both of them there. And then, of course, whoever's not there as a starter is going to immediately work right into that closing mix. And again, like I've said all offseason, I don't really care. I think both guys are going to throw a lot. They're going to be good in whatever role you put them in. Works for me. No debate about it. So we're down here looking at these closers. Of course, Christian Fouch entered the game in the 9th inning the other day. Wasn't a save situation because it was a 2-2 game or a 2-1 game, I guess. And was it? No, it was 2-2. And so he ends up getting the win because Arkansas came back and no, it was 1-1. That's what it was. It was 1-1. But anyways, it was a tie game, 9th inning, high leverage situation. Christian Fouch goes in there. Any debate there? Like, I feel like, he didn't get the save, but it's clearly they're going to use him in a very high leverage, late inning type of role. Just a natural evolution from what we saw him do last year. Of course, Carson Wiggins already has 1 save to his name. He came in through the 9th inning of a close ball game. Clearly, they view him in that closing role. And again, when I did the Circle of Trust a couple weeks ago, I had him in a setup role. So it's not really all that different. I feel like all 3 of those guys, regardless of whether it's Wood or Beidelshees, you would feel good about in the 9th inning of a ball game. So any given weekend, you might be able to just mix and match and say, hey, Fouch, you're going to close out Friday's game. Wiggins, you're closing out Saturday's game. And then Beidelshees, you're closing out Sunday's game, or Wood, whoever. And so I think you've got a lot of options there. Might not all be closing. Might have one guy to be set up. But again, those are the 3 like main high leverage, big time stuff guys that I think you should expect to see as you get closer and closer to the end of the ball game. Of course, we got the left-handed options over there. Parker Coyle, who there was some controversy when I had Parker Coyle as a circle of trust guy going into the weekend or going into the season. I feel like not that he like threw his socks off or anything. He threw an inning and 2/3, gave up a couple hits, one of which is a bloop single that should have been caught. Had 1 strikeout. Not like Parker Coyle lit up the world and like set, really announced his presence. But I think you could tell by the way they used him, the fact that he was the only guy they used twice this past weekend. Both of those times they were kind of towards the end of the ball game, big moments in the ball game, tight ball game situations. Clearly, he's a guy that they trust a lot. He's earned his way to be in those type of situations with the way that he's been throwing the ball leading up to the season. So I think clearly he's going to be one of, if not your top left-handed, left-on-left option out of the bullpen. Cole Gilbert, the freshman, who we got to see throw 1 inning the other day through the 7th inning in a run rule victory on Monday. Went just 1 inning, walked 1 guy, got a quick double play, got a strikeout. He's had a little bit of an up and down roller coaster run here this spring, but his last couple outings have been good. And of course, in the fall, he was lights out dominant. And so I think his evolution is going to be something to monitor, something to watch. You might end up seeing him in a midweek starting role. Who knows? We'll see what they end up doing with him. But I certainly think he's going to be one of your top left-handed options out of the bullpen when it's all said and done. And Colin Fisher is the only guy on this list here that did not throw in the game this past weekend. Dave was actually asked about that, Dave Van Horn, and he was saying that the plan was to get Gibbler an inning, then get Colin Fisher to throw an inning. And they even considered bringing him in that 7th inning just to kind of get him some work because they could see the writing on the wall and see that they were going to end up run ruling the guys. But the 2 run rules on, I guess, Friday and Monday kind of affected. Like, I'm sure they would have liked to maybe throw, of course, Fisher, maybe a couple of freshman arms like a Ross Felder, like a Tag Andrews, like a Steele Eves, who also got up in the bullpen there. So I think those 3 guys, Colin Fisher, of course, was your midweek starter last year, showed a lot of promise as a freshman, big time strike thrower. All 3 of those guys, not necessarily like your high, mid to high 90s blow you away type of stuff. But of course, when you're a lefty, you can get away with that. Gibbler probably has the best quote unquote stuff out of that trio there. But I just really like that all three of these guys throw a ton of strikes. They mix speeds. They're left-handed. They just kind of have that funkiness to them that throws guys off. And so I think you're going to see all three of those guys get some work in left-handed relief options out of the bullpen. And then, of course, you move over to the left side. I'm kind of bouncing all around this circle here. Y'all like this graphic, by the way? Y'all like this little circle? It's not a perfect circle. I kind of had to stretch it out a little bit to fit all the names in there. But of course, you got your mid to long relief righties. So I switched up the kind of order of how I put all this together here. But Will McIntyre, look, I know he's a polarizing figure for whatever reason. People, I know that they're probably wish that someone different would go ahead and take that role. I know they're probably sick of seeing the big righty out of there, but the reason he's continuing to be in these situations is because the coaching staff has a lot of trust in him. And I feel like he's definitely earned the benefit of the doubt with the way that he's thrown throughout his career. He's shown up for Arkansas in so many big moments, big-time strike thrower. I don't really think there's any debate about whether or not he deserves to be in the circle of trust, at least right now. I have no reason to believe that he shouldn't be. Maybe later in the year, if you have if you have Tate McGuire turns into be, a stud, maybe Aiden Jimenez takes a jump, maybe Ben Bybee takes a jump, maybe Hunter Dietz comes back and all of a sudden he's looking like a first rounder. Maybe you'll just be able to have a bunch of talented arms develop. But realistically, you're going to need that guy in this mix of all these talented, hard throwing guys in this Arkansas pitching staff. You're going to need a dude to just go out there and get a guy out, throw strikes, mix speeds. Will McIntyre does all of that. Did give up a solo home run the other day, but honestly threw pretty well. I mean, he threw 2 2/3 innings, gave up a couple hits, gave up the run, did have 3 strikeouts. But for the most part, I think Will McIntyre gave Arkansas an effective outing in that Friday game. He was the first guy out of the bullpen, so I don't think there's really, again, any case to be made that he's not a circle of trust guy at this point in time. Dylan Carter also, coming back from a disappointing 2024 season, a season where I think he probably, if he were being honest, probably rushed back. I think they probably should have maybe given him some more time to simmer. But I definitely think he's going to be a much better version of himself. He's thrown well in these offseason scrimmages. He ended up going an inning and 2/3, gave up a couple hits, one of which I believe was a bunt single, had 1 strikeout. I thought he threw pretty well, gave Arkansas a chance in that game, and then Coyle came in and helped him out after. And then again, another cop-out here. So all 3 of these guys pitched. Aiden Jimenez threw an inning in Friday's game, the second game of that doubleheader Friday. His final line is literally identical to Ben Bybee's, but I would argue that Aiden Jimenez threw much better. I mean, he was charged with 2 hits, one of which was a literal routine fly ball to straightaway right field that Rocco Pepe just lost and didn't get under. So it goes down as a hit, but really that's a mishandled play by the right fielder that absolutely should have been an out. And then the run was driven in on a ball that was hit directly to Michael Anderson at first base. That took a little bit of a funny hop, and it was hit pretty hard. But I felt like you could have maybe argued for an error on that one. So it goes down in the book as 2 hits, 1 run. But really, I thought Aiden Jimenez did a pretty good job. Threw the ball pretty well in his 1 inning. Tate McGuire also, I believe he gave up either a leadoff single or something like that, but ends up getting a double play ball. Ends up also actually struck out the first hitter he faced, then gave up the single, then got the double play ball. But I thought Tate McGuire looked okay in his 1 inning of work. He was a guy I did not have in the circle of trust 2 weeks ago when we did this, just because it had not been going super well for him in the spring scrimmages, and I felt like he was kind of maybe the odd man out. And we'll see how it plays out. I really think I have the 3 names kind of listed there: Bybee, Jimenez, McGuire. Bybee gave a couple hits and a run in his 1 inning of work. I really feel like, I just don't like, you get into the season, like I said, I just don't think you're going to really throw 12, 13 guys every weekend. So I'm listing all these guys in the circle of trust right now. It's definitely going to trim up a little bit. And especially if you get some guys, like if Colin Fisher gets going, if Hunter Dietz comes back and he gets going, maybe that moves some guys around, maybe shuffles some things around. But I really think the reason I kind of lumped Bybee, Jimenez, and McGuire together is I feel like you're probably going to have maybe one of those guys emerge and be a legitimate right-handed bullpen option for you to go along there with McIntyre and Carter. And, of course, some of your closing guys that have a little bit better stuff. I also think all 3 of those guys that are listed there in that slash there in the right-handed mid to long relief section, all 3 are guys that could be midweek starters. I mean, Bybee, He's been the midweek starter for Arkansas the last 2 years. Honestly, I feel like if in a perfect world, he would kind of graduate from that and move into a weekend role. I feel like that's kind of the next step of his evolution and what he can do. But again, he's going to have to go out there and earn it. He's going to have to beat out some of these other guys. Aiden Jimenez, of course, was a projected weekend starter this time last year at Oregon State before he got hurt. So I think he's definitely a guy that maybe, and again, as he's working back from injury, maybe that's the best way to kind of let him ease into things, is to let him be a midweek starter. And then Tate McGuire got some starting action in the Cape this past summer, mixes speeds, has the stuff to do it. I could see them going that midweek starting role with him. Could also see them going that route with Fisher and with Gibbler as well. So when it comes to Tuesdays, Arkansas's got no shortage of options. And I think all these guys are probably going to get some work in those Tuesday and Wednesday games. But that's kind of the way I see it right now. Again, it's always subject to change. We're going to continue to update this as we move along. Before we get out of here, though, I did want to just touch on Hunter Dietz, who I kind of casually mentioned here. And of course, just to refresh everyone's memory, Hunter Dietz is the very talented, I believe they're going to have him listed as a redshirt freshman, even though he did throw an inning last year. I think they did end up getting him the medical redshirt. He's a guy that is in the same class as Gackle, as Souza, as Helfrich, as all these guys. Was actually Arkansas's top recruit in last year's class, at least among the guys that made it to campus. Had some arm troubles leading up to the season, so he ended up not making his collegiate debut until the LSU series, and I think that was like mid-April. Ended up throwing an inning there in a high leverage situation. So again, it kind of tells you how they view him, how good his stuff is. Then I think he threw one more time in a midweek game. Then they had to shut him down for the year. His arm was just really giving him trouble. Was kind of continuing to be sore. They end up shutting him down for the year, and he ends up having the internal brace procedure, which is like basically the cheat code to Tommy John. Like, if you don't really want to have Tommy John, you do the internal brace thing. I'm not a doctor. Someone who actually does these surgeries could probably give you a better detailed breakdown of it. But it's a little bit of a shorter recovery. It's not the full 12 to 18 month rehab thing. So the hope was that by Christmas, I think like in the offseason when we spoke to Dave, he was saying the hope is that by Christmas, Gibbler, Fisher, Jimenez, and Dietz would all kind of be ready to start throwing then, and they could ramp up and be ready for the season. We saw that play out with Fisher, who had a very similar procedure. He ends up throwing over Christmas break, threw in some scrimmages leading up to the season. We didn't get to see him throw this weekend, but he was available. He's a guy that will probably throw this weekend. He had a really good outing in Arlington last year. And then same for Jimenez, who they described as ahead of schedule. Just wasn't the same with Dietz. Was not quite on that same schedule as those guys. And Dave was asked about it in the press conference today, and he gave a similar answer that he gave a couple weeks ago, where he was like, it's just kind of a mental thing. Like, we're not, he's throwing in bullpens behind closed doors with Matt Hobbs and the other pitching coaches. Not really having trouble like letting it loose. There's kind of like a mental hurdle, which of course you see with athletes all the time, whether it's a knee injury for a basketball player, whether it's an arm injury for a pitcher, whether it's a foot injury for a football player, like whatever, there's like kind of that resistance to trust it and really just go full send, which of course I think the coaching staff would like to see before they put him out there in a ball game. And this is also a guy who, again, one of the top prospects in the country coming out of high school, one of the top prospects in his class, and is definitely like this time next year, he will be draft eligible. Even if he hasn't thrown at all, he will still be a guy who is on that MLB radar because of how good his stuff is. This is a guy that when he's really at his best and really cooking, he's 95 to 97 with that fastball, has touched 98 at Arkansas. And again, this is a guy that just a few weeks ago, Dave was saying, if we can get him back to the level he was at last fall when he first arrived on campus, he would be one of the best pitchers on the team. He said he was better than any left-hander not named Hagen Smith on last year's Arkansas team in terms of just a stuff, what they bring to the table. Now, he was a guy they had starting in scrimmages. I think for sure, like if this guy were fully healthy, he's clearly someone that would not only help Arkansas, but completely change the makeup of everything in that bullpen. And so we'll see if he ever ends up getting back to that form. I know there's a lot of guys who have been kind of waiting. Anytime I talk about pitching, I get a few comments. What about Dietz? What about Dietz? Where's Dietz at? Where's he going to pitch? Why is he not in the circle of trust? And it's mostly just because, again, he hasn't pitched yet. When he does make his return to the mound, he's going to be a guy that will quickly rise up the rankings of that circle of trust and potentially could be even in that setup closing mix. Like, I really think he's that good. And I think he would certainly be a weapon that Arkansas could use. But just right now, it doesn't seem like he's quite ready yet. And Dave giving a similar answer on him 2 weeks apart is kind of what's concerning me a little bit. I hope that they're cautious with it. I hope they don't rush him into action, which it doesn't sound like they're going to do. But honestly, you'd kind of like to see him kind of making strides to where maybe he could get on the mound for Arkansas here soon, but was not available this past weekend. Does not sound like he will be available in Arlington. I wonder if he'll make the trip. So again, maybe he's back by conference play. Who knows? But just something to monitor there. So before we get out of here, just one more look at the circle of trust for everybody that wants to screenshot it and put it in your brain, really hammer it home, memorize it, have it memorized. So again, if you just kind of look at this Arkansas bullpen and how the schedule hypothetically could work out, you always think about it like Arkansas the past couple of years, they've had really good talented pitchers. And it was mostly like if they could stay on schedule where you get Hagan goes his 6 innings, you bring in Fouch for his 1 inning, and then you bring in your closers for 1 or 2 innings after that. Like it all kind of works out. But it's really tough to just stay on schedule. But if you think about it, let's say Gackle can give you 6 innings on Friday. And hopefully you have a lead after that point. Then all of a sudden you can go to one of these mid to long relief righties like a McIntyre, like a Carter, or any of those guys there but listed below for maybe that 7th inning. And then you can just go right into it. I mean, Fouch is a guy, he threw 2 innings last weekend. I think he can absolutely be a 2-inning closer for you. Or you could go Wiggins for 1 inning, Fouch for 1 inning. And then again, you go into Saturday, you still have a guy in Wood or Beidelshees, whoever it is that's left out of that rotation, that's kind of available. And that's a guy who could go anywhere from 1 inning to 5 innings. I mean, we saw both of them throw 5 innings last week. You'd also still have Coyle available. You'd still have Fisher available, still have Gibbler available. Any of those righties that you don't use. Like if you just think about a 3-game series, 27 innings, we just watched Arkansas play 4 games and they weren't even able to use some of these guys. And that was with, one of those guys in that starting mix throwing 5 innings. So if you kind of shorten it into 27 innings, you say, let's say Gackle gives you 6. Let's say Root gives you 6. Let's say whoever's, between Wood or Beidelshees, let's say they give you 5. So that'd be 17 innings out of your starters. And, give or take, maybe it'll be 15, maybe it'll be 17, whatever, in that range. You start looking around and you're like, man, I only need 10 innings. And I've got all these options between McIntyre, Carter, Bybee, Fisher, Coyle, Gibbler, Fouch, Wiggins, and then, of course, whoever's left out of that rotation. It becomes a pretty heated competition in terms of how they're going to assess all these guys. Think about how good you're going to have to be to get into that bullpen mix. And again, we've spoken about it a lot leading up to the season. I think the best way to go about it is to take some of these guys, like a Carson Wiggins who, if you wanted to throw Carson Wiggins 3 or 4 innings, I'm sure he could do it. I'm sure he'd do a fine job. But then think about how good he'd be for 1 inning. Fouch, I'm sure you could stretch him out to maybe 3 or 4 innings, but think about how good he'll be for 1 to 2 innings. Same with a guy like Gibbler as a freshman. I'm sure you could stretch him out and throw him 4 or 5 innings. I mean, hell, he's probably going to do that later in his career. He's probably going to be a weekend starter for you. But if you're asking him to maybe get you 3 to 5 outs, a lot more dangerous. And I think the same applies for really any of those righties, whether it's Carter, McIntyre, Bybee, Jimenez, McGuire, any of those guys. They're going to be better in a shortened role. And so I think this kind of lines up perfectly for this Razorback team to be able to mix and match skill sets. They'll be able to go mid-inning and match up with a lefty if they need, match up with a righty if they need, get a high velocity guy, get a low velocity guy, get a guy that throws breaking balls. Like they've got all the kinds of mix of skill sets that you'd like to see. And so it's definitely interesting to see all the possibilities. And I can't wait to see how they handle it this weekend. Hopefully you're playing 3 close. I mean, I don't know about hopefully. Ideally, most likely you're going to be playing in 3 relatively close games, which is just a lot, forces you to make decisions. Whereas, some of these guys, like I'll pull it back up again. Bybee threw in a pretty low leverage situation. Aiden Jimenez threw in a pretty low leverage situation. Tate McGuire threw in a pretty low leverage situation. And of course, Gibbler threw in a pretty low leverage situation as well. And you could really honestly say the same for Wood or Beidelshees. So what's going to happen if Arkansas plays 27 innings and they're all kind of high leverage, close game innings? We'll get to find out really quick who they really trust in this circle of trust. So that's all I have for you guys today. Nice little recap. We did the hitting yesterday, the pitching today. Now, as we get closer to the weekend, we'll start to really look ahead to the weekend a little bit, start to really assess where things are at. But I appreciate everybody for tapping in, man, and always tuning in with the Baumbastic Podcast. Even if we disagree, even if you think I'm an idiot for still liking Nolan Souza, whatever the case may be, I appreciate everybody for being here. Appreciate everybody for their love of the Razorbacks and their love of baseball. So let's keep this thing rolling, man. We'll be here putting out that content every day. And I really appreciate everybody for tapping in. So have a beautiful Wednesday. Let's hope Arkansas basketball gets that win over Auburn tonight, and we will see you tomorrow.